Hi, it's Susie here from the Casual Birder podcast, and you're listening to Comics in Motion.
Spiderman. But he's real. There is someone like that. He can climb walls, and he is like a spider. I mean it. No, sir, I told you he's not a spider. He's a full-grown man. He's got the strength of a spider, but it's all in proportion to his size. Spiders are very, very strong, you know, so he's thousands of times stronger than you or me.
Welcome, everyone. This is episode 59 of the Comics in Motion podcast. I'm Chris Phelps, and my co-host and good friend is Mr. Dave Horrocks.
Hi, Chris, and hello to our listeners out there. Welcome to Comics in Motion. What we like to do here is we like to review media like movies and TV shows that are based on comic books. Myself, I'll be reviewing from the perspective of a long-time comic book reader.
And I'll be reviewing from the TV and movie perspective.
And what we also like to do is we also like to spoil the hell out of everything we review. So if you haven't watched our choice of the week, then we'd advise you to proceed with caution. And what we also love is when you can head over to Apple Podcasts or your podcast catcher of choice and drop us a 5-star review. And this helps us grow the show and gets us out there to other listeners. Now, Chris, we've had an ongoing discussion, haven't we, about what's going on with the Netflix series, the Netflix Defenders. We've had Punisher's been out for a few weeks now, hasn't it? And no news of a cancellation, so that's booked the trend. Obviously, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, and then Daredevil all got cancelled in pretty quick succession. But it seems to be goodbye Defenders and hello Offenders. So have you seen the news from coming out of Hulu?
No, I haven't, Dave, actually. It's the first I've heard. The Defenders, I had a feeling was going to go. We'd said that anyway, hadn't we? Literally going off what's already been cancelled before. But I don't actually know anything about the Offenders, Dave. What is it? Is that like a splinter group, or is it just something complete? Is it a Marvel property?
Not that I'm aware of. So there are Marvel properties in there, but I'm not aware of a book called The Offenders. It kind of reminds me a little bit in Thor Ragnarok when Thor says about, you know, creating his own team called the Revengers. But it's actually so it's a similar idea because they've announced that they're gonna do 4 different shows. So one is MODOK, one is Hitmonkey, another is Tigra and Dazzler, and then the 4th one you'll be happy to know is Howard the Duck.
Dave, you cannot see what I'm doing. I'm shuddering now down the spine. So it's going to be absolutely terrible then, Dave.
Well, it's not the most obvious set of properties that I was thinking they'd want to show, but I mean these are going to be animated, so it's not quite like the live action stuff that Netflix are doing. So you'd imagine they'll do it on a lower budget. But yeah, all these 4 not 4 characters, but these 4 titles, because Tigra and Dazzler, you've obviously got 2 in there. They're going to have their own series, and then it'll all come together, and I'm guessing they'll team up, and there'll be an Offenders.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something obviously we'll probably get round to watching. I know some of the Hulu stuff that comes over in America, it ends up on Netflix anyway. So obviously we're going to end up seeing it somewhere along the line. I just don't know Howard the Duck. He didn't really have any powers, did he, other than the fact that he was from an alternate universe? So I know these comics available for Howard the Duck. Is he some sort of badass duck in these comics, or is it just purely he plays as he did in that terrible film?
Well, he's got no powers at all. And he's just, he's placed in our world. He just happens to be a duck. And when he was written in the 70s, it was more satirical. So just, the way he was written and everything by Steve Gerber. And so I've seen a lot of people say, he probably, he should stay in the 70s, which is funny given our choice of the week, but there are a few things which should stay in the 70s. So yeah, I'm a bit surprised. Obviously, there was the movie which we weren't big fans on, were we? to put it mildly, in the 80s film. But then he did make an appearance right at the end in the end credit scenes on Guardians of the Galaxy, didn't he? And I think that was, people were quite excited about it. I think probably people with a lot of nostalgia and kind of forgetting how terrible the movie was. But yeah, so it looks like he's going to be resurrected. And like I say, I imagine it. These are animated shows, but I don't think they're going to be like, the 90s X-Men or anything like that. I think it's going to be pitched more at adults than kids, but let's see, I guess.
No. Well, it's interesting, Dave, anyway, to say the least.
Well, Hulu as a concept is quite interesting, isn't it? Because Disney have already got a stake in it. And I think if you were a betting man, you'd have to say, well, at some point, Disney are probably going to buy them out. They've already ran the Runaways, so that's where they first started working, I guess, directly with Marvel. So, who knows? But while Disney are buying up everything, I'd say they're probably going to buy them out at some point.
Yeah, and it'll be all streamlined completely on one format, I would have thought, Dave. It'll just emerge into one, I think.
Yeah.
I do agree with that. I do agree.
But also, coming out of that, you've got the, not anything concrete, but again, people keeping their cards close to their chest. A guy called Craig Erwick, who's Hulu's senior vice president for original content, he wasn't ruling out that you could see the Defenders, so the Netflix characters, popping up on Hulu. Either as, rerunning shows or maybe just creating new content, but with those same characters.
It'd be a shame, Dave, other than Iron Fist. I would genuinely be invested. Unless they had a different Iron Fist, which I think they need to recast. But the other guys who play Luke Cage, that's Mike, and I can't second him. Mike thing, he's a good actor. I liked him, but he has had a bit of controversy on social media.
Mike Coulter, yeah.
Yeah, he's had a bit of controversy with some of his comments. Obviously, Jessica Jones, Daredevil, all day long, and obviously the Punisher, which is probably going to end up on there. I guess I would have thought with what's recently happened. So yeah, I'd be invested in it, Dave. Definitely.
Yeah. That would be interesting where it goes, won't it? But I think I'd said on last week's show that I'm not all for Disney owning everything. I do think there has to be a bit of diversity there. You're going to have good and bad, and you can't argue with a lot of the stuff that Marvel Studios has produced. But I want to, spread it out a bit. So Disney, you can't imagine, would have done anything like the Defenders, and I really like that sort of street level corner of the Marvel universe.
No, I agree. Totally agree. Right, so Dave, a bit more news this week. One of the absolute box office hits from last year, scraping into this year, was Aquaman, which we reviewed a few episodes ago. And it's already been commissioned for a follow-up. Surprise, surprise, Dave, with making over $1 billion. It didn't take much.
Who knew?
Yeah, exactly. It didn't take much convincing. But again, they've hired all the same guys again. It's going to be directed by James Wan and Peter Safran. And the writers are David Leslie, Johnson McGoldrick. So it is what it is. We knew it was going to happen. Where they go, are they going to develop the characters around that? We've got a world that they've created. Let's hope so. Because I enjoyed it, and you enjoyed it as well. I just thought he's a good guy, Jason Momoa, and I think the Aquaman stuff's never been played out very well, but I do and did really enjoy this one. So it'd be some point maybe next year we might see that release date, probably the latter end of 2020, early 2021. Yeah,
that'd be good. I mean, I'm intrigued what Warner Brothers are going to do with all the different properties. So Aquaman on its own, like you say, made $1 billion. Of course, it's going to get a sequel. Are we going to see them trying to emulate what they've done across at Marvel again, and have a Justice League 2 or something like that? Or are they just going to, there were rumors that they're just going to concentrate on the solo movies and kind of, maybe have a nod and a wink to a wider universe, but not really, architect something that goes towards a big team-up film.
Yeah, I've got to say, Dev, I don't know about yourself, and I don't know whether I'm overthinking these things, which I know is one of my fortes, but I really struggle the fact that in something like Aquaman or Man of Steel, or, obviously we've not had a Batman standalone one with Ben Affleck, is all these things going on and devastation and everything, and, it's within the same world. And I just find it hard to believe that a Superman didn't come over and give Aquaman a hand. You could be there in about 30 seconds or a minute. Do you understand what I mean? Like, you've got these origin stories and all this devastation's going on all over the world, but yet they team up for Justice League. And I know that's me overthinking it. It's the whole point of an origin film. I just really struggle. I just wish, as much as they're from the same world, they all just stayed separately. And you believe that they're not, you know what I mean? Like, their own character has its own Earth to deal with. Because
yeah.
I don't know how to explain that correctly, but just what I mean, I'd really have a hard time believing it.
I think I know what you mean, because, well, let's face it, for Justice League, they all kind of team up, don't they?
Yeah.
But essentially, when they don't have Superman, they get their backsides handed to them, and then when Superman turns up, he just takes down old Steppenwolf, doesn't he?
Yes.
And he doesn't need anyone else. So there is no team. Superman is just way overpowered compared to everyone else, isn't he?
Yeah.
So the only interest for me in that extended universe is really when Superman's not around. If you look at it like an extended universe. So when he was when he was dead and got better after, but, you know, then you had the Suicide Squad being put together.
Yeah.
Now, again, you could say, well, okay, so they think a lady with a bat who's a bit loopy, someone who can shoot very accurately, you know, these aren't really stacking up to replace Superman, but, you know, you don't have Superman in that world. So when he is in that world, why didn't he just fix everything?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. It's just me thinking out loud on this, Dave. I just struggle with it. Really do struggle with it.
Yeah.
I think you've explained it right. It's just there. I think it is what it is, I suppose. And that's a horrible word to say, Dave. It's a line that everyone says, but yeah.
Yeah. But sticking with DC, I know we've spoken about, you know, after Ben Affleck's officially not going to be the next Batman and they're going to go in a different direction. I saw in the last 24 hours that Scott Adkins, who's basically he's a stunt guy. I imagine you've seen quite a few of his movies, Chris. He's all into his martial arts and everything. Yeah. He played Weapon 11 in Wolverine Origins, and he's done all these kind of kung fu movies as well. So have you seen any of those?
Yeah, it's in a series which is really famous, or B-movie famous, called Boyka. And he's like the main guy, the karate guy. He's actually from the West Midlands.
Yeah, he's from Sutton Coldfield, isn't he?
Yeah, he has actually auditioned for Superman as well. And he's very much like Michael J. White, who obviously when we reviewed Spawn, same sort of thing, Dave. He had like an underground B-movie highlight reel of films, and he's an absolute unbelievable athlete. Martial artist doesn't come into it, Dave. He's fantastic, and he's actually starred across from Michael J. White in a few films. But also, I think one of the things that might have got him on the radar was he was actually Lucian in Doctor Strange as well. So that's really highlight reel wise. Is his only accreditation really, other than B movies. So I'd be interested, and I've seen some of his auditions before, Dave. He has championed playing a Batman or a Superman. And a Batman, I think, could work, because especially he's got a look of a bit of a Ben Affleck. He's early 40s, isn't he? But he has got a bit of a look of him. But I don't know how far you're going to go back. But by anything, he does not need a stunt double, Dave. He's absolutely fantastic martial artist.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a good-looking bloke as well. He doesn't look unlike Ben Affleck, does he?
No. So you're not far from the realms of fantasy.
Yeah.
I agree. But if it was Chris Phelps from the mid-'80s to early 90s, I'd be renting all these videos from a video shop, Dave, because it is pure B-movie karate stuff, definitely. So, yeah, interesting. And why not, Dave? Why not? There's not many people out there that I'd prefer someone who's not that known to go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to see him given a go at something. Now, I don't know if you've seen his audition video. It looks like it's him just doing it in a hotel room, but he keeps looking directly at the camera, which I find a little bit odd. so actors, they never look directly at the camera unless you're doing a kind of a Ryan Reynolds Deadpool breaking the fourth wall kind of thing. So I found that a little bit strange, but he's basically playing out a scene from Dark Knight Rises. And I think that why not would be he's a little bit old. He's 42. He looks absolutely fantastic for it. But when it broke that, it wasn't going to be Ben Affleck playing it, they said they were going to go with a younger Batman. So I'd have thought they'd have been looking for someone who's, late 20s, early 30s. And that can carry the franchise for a few films.
Yeah, I agree, because it's very much like what they did with James Bond. They've said this in the past, haven't they? We're going to go with someone young, and obviously now, 12 years down the line, Daniel Craig is early to nearly mid-50s now, isn't he? So it very much like that when they played Sean Connery, Roger Moore. Roger Moore was actually, I think he was older than Sean Connery when he took over, but they said to that, we're going to go with someone younger. We've had it before with various characters. So I do agree. I would actually go as far back as saying go for someone early 20s if you're really going to go. But obviously it's got to be within the timeline of him becoming Batman or discovering who he is. But like you said, Dave, and I think, I've listened to our episode a couple of times now when you mentioned it, and I think it's a great point. And I sort of said it, but you said it really in depth as, why do we need to see another origin film? We don't. Yeah. And I agree with you. There should be this detective side, Adler, what you'd alluded to with Michael Keaton's 89 Batman. A bit of discovery, a bit of something. He's established as Batman. He's just on a case after somebody or whatever, So I agree with that. I think that'd be something completely different to what we've expected to see. So I think he isn't probably the right guy, but if he got a chance, I won't be complaining.
Yeah, I'd like to see him as given a go as something. Like you say, he's physically up to it. So let's see.
Do you make playlists? Of course you do, and so do I. I'm Katie Kruger, and Show Me Your Playlist is the podcast where I sit down and talk to a new guest each week that has something to say and a playlist to share. Get inspired and find new music each week. Follow us on Instagram at Show Me Your Playlist, and don't forget to listen to Show Me Your Playlist on iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.
So, this week's review is Spiderman 1977. Now, Dave, I was -1 at this point. I was not born for another year, and you were 15? No, sorry, Dave. I jest. But what have you got today, please, mate, comic book-wise?
Okay, so Chris, who created Spider-Man?
Stan Lee.
Conventional belief would say yes, but I'm going to take you on a little journey where the waters get a bit muddier. Okay, so Spider-Man first appeared back in Amazing Fantasy number 15 back in 1962. The co-creators go down as Stan Lee and artist Steve Ditko. Now, Stan Lee, he must have given a million interviews on creating Spider-Man, so his is the most well-documented and conventional belief about what happened. He said he wanted a character who teenagers could identify with after there was basically a big surge in teenagers buying comic books. Now, he said he got some inspiration from the Pulp Fiction book, The Spider, and thought the name Spider-Man was pretty cool. And at that time, there were a lot of teenage characters in comic books, but quite often they were like sidekicks, so people like Robin. And there were also characters who had boy in the title, Superboy and people like that. And Stan wanted this character to grow up in the books, so he wanted him to be Spider-Man. Now, he did have a bit of resistance actually getting him into a book from Marvel publisher Martin Goodman, and he couldn't actually get his approval. And it was only when the decision came to cancel the book Amazing Adult Fantasy. It sounds a bit wrong, that, doesn't it, for a comic book? But basically they were going to cancel this book, and Stan saw that as his chance to convince Goodman that, let me just put in this character into this book. It's like an anthology book, so loads of different stories. And Goodman gave his approval on it. Now, for that last issue, they renamed it just Amazing Fantasy as opposed to Amazing Adult Fantasy. Don't know why, but they did. Now, according to Stan Lee, he asked Jack Kirby to draw Spider-Man but he didn't like the way he looked. He said he made him too heroic, and he was basically like Captain America. So, that real bodybuilder shape, and it wasn't right for the Spider-Man. So he asked Steve Ditko, who's another artist in that Marvel office, to come up with the design. And basically, Ditko came up with that whole Spider-Man look, the suit and everything. Now, at the time, he was living with an art school classmate, a guy called Eric Stanton, and he gave an interview. He basically wasn't taking any credit for Spider-Man at all, but he lived with him at the time and did some storyboards with Ditko, working on some ideas. And he said he was pretty sure he came up with the idea of the webs coming out of his hands, which I think is pretty significant. Now, though Ditko was the artist for Amazing Fantasy number 15, Lee didn't like the cover that he drew. So that quite famous cover was actually a Jack Kirby cover, and Kirby sketched it and Ditko inked it. Now, Jack Kirby himself disputed Stan Lee's claim of creating the character at all, and basically said, Stan Lee had almost nothing to do with it. So he said that he came up with the idea together with Joe Simon back in the 1950s when they came up with a character called the Silver Spider. Now, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby are the creative team that created Captain America, which I'm sure I'll talk about a bit more in a future episode. Now, Joe Simon went a step further, claiming he'd called the character Spider-Man, and it was later changed to the Silver Spider. So Simon and Kirby did go on to create a character called The Fly. And if you go back and you look at some of the images for this, so it was published by Red Circle Comics, part of the Archie Adventure series. You can see the similarities. But Kirby did say in an interview in the 70s, he said, Ditko basically was responsible for Spider-Man being so popular. The way he looked, the stories that he put together. Remember ages ago I spoke to you, Chris, about the Marvel method. So Stan would come up with a very loose, high-level synopsis, and then the artists were left to basically draw and create the story through each panel. So, yeah, as far as Kirby was concerned, Ditko should have got all the credit for Spider-Man. So you've got quite a few different names thrown in there. There's a bit of controversy. Stan himself in interviews would say, I've told this story so many times, I can't remember what's true or not. So it's all a little bit murky, and of course, because the character, there's so much money involved with it, all the merchandising as well as all the movies and stuff. So that possibly contributed to all of these arguments and, counterclaims and what have you. But if you look on the movies and stuff now, it's, created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko.
Really good, that, Dave. So,
Chris, how about the movie background, the TV movie background?
Yeah, I'm going to struggle with this one, I think, this week, Dave. There isn't actually a lot out there. It's more researching different articles and snippets of interviews. So I've come up with a little bit of something. This was supposed to be a precursor to the TV series, which it was. It was a pilot that was actually not really supposed to go to air. But when they actually took it out to the TV audience reviewers before they actually did release it, it got a 17.8 rating. Out of 30, which CBS, who produced it, and it was produced on September 14th, 1977, were actually blown away by it. Now, it actually ended up being released overseas, Dave, as an actual film in 1990, straight to VHS. Now, from this film, Spider-Man, they ended up with 2 sequels back-to-back in 1978, 79. And one of the main things that they did with this film was a lot of the effects were, how should we say, slightly different than what was available at the time. Like Spider-Man crawling on the ceiling, it was actually upside down. There was no trickery. A lot of it was mentioned that they were going to go down the route of the Batman 66 stuff where he's, the walking up a wall, Batman and Robin, and the pulling the rope. And really all they've done is, as they're, cutting it on the cutting room floor, they turn the actual camera angle cuttings to the side. So you get that effect. There's none of that. It was all done real time. The swinging from the ceilings was done real time. The stuff outside on buildings was all done correctly with hoists and cranes. And what they did was a lot of the scenes where they used, and this is a classic this day, they actually used and are recycled. And I've never watched the actual TV show. There was 13 episodes born off the back of this film, as well as the 2 other films, 2 other sequels. they used the same camera shots and same movement of Spider-Man when he's moving from buildings and swinging from the web around everywhere. They actually used that throughout the 13 episodes of the show. And what they did was they shot it from about 4 different angles and just recycled the same stuff over and over, which is just
that's really interesting, but not that surprising because I mean this is 77, so it's the oldest thing that we've reviewed by just a year, isn't it? So we did Superman the movie, that was 1978, but that was a very different kind of budget, wasn't it? You know, this is a TV budget, and you know, I'd have to say for a TV budget, they've done all right there, I think.
There's something I want to mention regarding the special effects, but I want to leave that till later, Dave, because I think it's a really good talking point. But as for Nicholas Hammond, who plays Spider-Man, he had no combat training, Dave. And a lot of the stunts and fight scenes weren't actually him.
What? Really?
No,
I'm shocked. Absolutely shocked.
Nicholas Hammond was actually the only surviving member of this film to go into the TV show as well. J. Jonah Jameson was not the same guy. The female characters were slightly different, but obviously Nick Hammond carried on. Now, if anybody might think, I do recognise that guy, if you do want to watch the film, which is available on YouTube and its sequels, he was actually in Sound of Music. He's one of the children in Sound of Music. He's actually the eldest son. So this was something where he'd been a bit part actor from the Sound of Music, which was done around about 1965. He'd had a few things where he'd been in like Starsky and Hutch, the Waltons, Little House on the Prairie. After this, he was in stuff like Magnum, The A-Team, just that bit part actor, Dave, like a TV actor. Mm-hmm. And he never really excelled himself. But one thing I did want to check was actually his age. Now, he is actually 68, when in this film he's supposed to be playing a student. And to me, he looked older than me and you, Dave. So that was the third thing I did when I watched the first 10 minutes of this. So other than that, there isn't any review scores. There's not any financial situation with the VHS, even though it was released on VHS. I watched it on the VHS as a kid. I remember actually hiring it from the video shop. I remember seeing it on the TV. There just isn't the figures. It's 41 years ago. So that's about all I've got really, Dave, on this one.
So I guess just one other thing. Probably a couple of other things. So the guy who played J. Jonah Jameson, I recognised him as well. Did you ever see Bewitched?
Yes, I did, yes.
Yeah, so he was in that fairly distinctive look. So as soon as he appeared on the screen, it's like, I know him. But I had to go to IMDb to remember where it was I knew him from. But I also know, I think this movie did actually get a theatrical release. So it was released in theatres. I think it was like West Germany or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting time capsule, the whole film, isn't it? You know, and it'd be interesting to watch it at the time, because we've watched Superman the movie and it stands up okay, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, there's a few things that leap out. I mean, young Clark's wig, but you can still have bad wigs nowadays, can't you? So, whereas this, you know, is definitely a TV movie budget back in the 70s, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, to be fair. But yeah, fantastic. And it's great to research it, Dave. I'm sure you've been the same with researching Spider-Man, so synonymous. But this is just, it's one of them things where when I'm researching this, I've gone down rabbit holes that I never thought I'd go down, reading about the characters, about how this was even made. It's just this all stuff that doesn't make any sense to get it on the screen. There was a lot of going through hoops and that to actually CBS actually commissioning this. And the way it was filmed very, it was trying to be serious, but because of the TV budget production and what they had, it had to sort of be a soap opera-ish type film. And I think that comes across. Well, obviously, we'll get into that as a review. So, yeah, interesting film.
Very good, very good. So should we go into our review then?
Let's go for it, mate.
Okay, so first of all, I mean, we decided to do this. We put out a Twitter poll, didn't we? So we had 4 different options of what we were going to review this week, and Spider-Man 77 won out. And I wasn't sure. I was thinking, have I seen this? Have I just watched a bit on YouTube at all? And as soon as the title credits come up, it hit me. I was like, oh yeah, I've definitely seen this, and I remember it. And for a split second, it hit me with the nostalgia, and you can hear that 70s music, which I've been singing to myself for the last couple of days. But then after it goes on for a little bit longer, because you've basically got Spider-Man seemingly climbing up a wall, I'm thinking, he doesn't know where he's going. He's like climbing around the wall. But he's like an actual spider with no clue about where he's actually going. He's got no direction. He's just ambling about the side of a building.
So true. But it's like when you I shouldn't say this, but when you get a spider and you prod it with your finger and it starts moving everywhere, it's like that's just like what is going on?
But yeah, I mean, I guess it serves the purpose of showing. You get all the credits popping up, and you get that little, Spider-Man imagery in the corner, But yeah, it did tickle me. But I tell you what, the music, I just love it. I mean, it is most definitely 70s. And it's influenced by the 60s Spider-Man theme tune, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I agree.
Yeah, because there's a few notes, and you think, it's like, the horn section's going to go into that old Spider-Man, but then it changes. But it's definitely got an element of that cartoon theme tune.
I say, and I've got to say, David, as someone like yourself, who I grew up on all the TV stuff from the mid to late 70s, so we're going Starsky and Hutch, $6 Million Man. I wasn't born till 78, but I grew up on that because the BBC had them on repeats. You were the same. We were born around the same time. I grew up on all these things going into the 80s. You've got stuff like the A-Team, Magnum P.I., Knight Rider, all sorts of different programs. But this sort of music was used on these things all the time. Especially, it reminded me a lot of Starsky and Hutch, to be honest, Dave. A lot of the music, other than I know there's a lot of warm music and funky stuff with Starsky, but when they were being serious and trying to chase somebody, you got this little eeriness to it. And it sounds daft, but if someone younger than us watches, they'll be like, what the hell is this? But for me, it's something I grew up with, so it doesn't feel out of place when I'm watching it.
Yeah, I think definitely if you're not born in the late 70s or early 80s, or if you're older, if you're not born before then, let's say that, you're probably not going to make it past the title credits, to be quite honest. But it definitely, it kind of has that Columbo type feel, doesn't it, throughout the whole movie? The camera shots, the way the actors are moving and conducting themselves on screen, apart from the guy in the red and blue suit, this could be like, an episode of Columbo or something.
Yeah. It could. I didn't even think of Columbo. Just one more thing.
Yeah.
That's terrible. But yeah, you are correct. And I think as well, I don't know about yourself, Dave, but it's readily available on YouTube, and it's a hard watch anyway, because obviously it's pre-HD, and obviously it's been filtered and compressed for YouTube. It's really difficult to see what's going on. But I love the outfits. I love the style of that late 70s. It's just classic. They've got flares on and everything, and the guy who's Peter Parker's got this farm cake haircut, hasn't he? And it's just...
It looks like a crash helmet, doesn't it? It's that big. If he fell off his bike, he'd be all right, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's just... Oh, it's brilliant. And then obviously we get the start of the film, and we've got like a doctor, haven't we, and a lawyer, and all of a sudden they just get up, don't they, and leave mid sort of, one of them's doing the lecturing, and the other one's in a court of law, isn't he? And
yeah,
and they just leave and get in the old cliched classic American car, the generic bad guy car, and disappear and just go and randomly rob a bank, don't we? We get this weird whirring noise, and straight away you're thinking, well, they're obviously in some sort of weird trance or there's something going on.
It's that sci-fi again, that dated kind of sci-fi sound that something's going on. It's like, wow. And then they have this blank expression on their face that they're being controlled in some way. But again, just a brilliant bit of time capsule sound effect.
Oh, fantastic. And then they rob the bank, they're driving down the street, and they actually hit a wall at what can only be described as a controlled accident, which must have been at about 5 miles.
It was a solid, I was thinking 5 miles. It was a solid 5 miles an hour.
And it knocks them both out, and then these two other henchmen come, rob the money, and these two guys are sort of in a coma, aren't they? They're just out of it, and it's absolute nonsense. But then we quickly pan to the Daily Bugle building. And I've got to say, Dave, as much as it's a Marvel property and we talked about our first ever review being Superman, I did take out of this Daily Bugle office and building and the way it was approached that DC had copied slightly the way this, I don't know if it's just generally offices around that time were like that, but it felt very much like the Daily Planet in some respects. Like they took a bit of influence from this film. I don't know if you picked up on that, especially with Jonah Jameson as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think possibly, but I think it's probably the other way round, to be honest. If you go back to the source material, so Clark Kent, he absolutely works for the Daily Planet, doesn't he? And Peter Parker, he sells his photographs to the Bugle. So both characters are very involved with the journalism of the day, and I think it's more from the characters in the comics than it is from, necessarily, Superman the movie stealing from this movie. It's just naturally because of the characters and their stories, I think, to place them there.
Yeah, you could be right, Dave. You could be right, to be fair. It makes sense. And then we get introduced to Peter, don't we? He's in there with J. Jonah. And I've got to say, Dave, they actually invented the internet pretty quick and emails these guys, didn't they? Because that guy comes in and saying, like, there's a breaking news story. We've just had this news bulletin thing come through. And within a split second, what I found brilliant, though, Dave, is Jameson says to Peter, he's not interested in his pictures and all that, like, they're nice, but they're not going to be...
Can I just say that, this guy, the actor who plays Peter Hammond, he's what, 6'4" or something like that? He looks like a big bloke, doesn't he? And he puts on the whiniest voice, It's unbelievable. He sounds like, he does sound like Luke Skywalker, but I was going back to Toshi Station to pick up some power converters. It's just really, really whiny. And because he's such a big frame bloke, I was like, that just seems weird. He was very, very whiny.
I mean, Dave, this is the point. Literally at the start, as I've said before, when I was looking at him and he goes, I've got to do college assignments. And I'm like, what were you saying? And I was like, there's no way that guy is younger than me. I was thinking he's got to be about 40. And I was straight on Wikipedia. I didn't believe Wikipedia. I'm on IMDB. I'm looking. And he genuinely was 28. But that first opening scene, I don't know. He must have an older face. When you look at him now at 68 years old, he looks great. He really does look really good. Nick Hammond really does. And I'm thinking he looks about 40 then. I genuinely thinking, I mean, look, he was 28 when he filmed this. So there's no way that he was that young,
Well, I think so he's doing his PhD, isn't he?
Yeah.
So he's at least, 21 or above?
Yeah.
I don't think Stan Lee actually liked this movie or the series at all. He said they didn't get the character. There was none of the humor. There was none of the people stories about it, really. But I guess, for me, the best stories were when he was in high school. You know, and lots of people have got different opinions, but I'll put it right out there. My favourite Spider-Man is Tom Holland, because for me, he absolutely embodies that high school Spider-Man, you know, and all the things. When he's Spider-Man, he's giving the smart aleck comments, you know, the quips and what have you. But here, I mean, like you say, I was thinking like mid-30s, this bloke. So, but again, you know, he's supposedly a PhD student, not someone who's, you know, 16, 17. But I think, you know, in terms of how old he looks, I don't think the fashion and the hair help.
No.
You know, because everyone wears a suit, don't they?
Yeah.
And he's got that big crash helmet of a haircut. I think that probably makes him look a bit older as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. And then I've got to say, I've got to give him credit here, Dave. So we're going back to 77. What I loved was Jameson says to Peter, put the telly on, please. Let's see. You know, he didn't say please, by the way. He just said, get the Parker, get the telly on and all this. He puts the telly on. And all of a sudden, the breaking news comes through, doesn't it? Literally, as the guy hands over this sort of fact email memo thing he's given him. And now, usually, when you watch a film from that era, when they're going to bribe somebody, it's usually like a bit like Austin Powers, you know, $1 million. But they went straight in for 77. We want 50 million because we've brainwashed people. And I'm thinking, there's not really any explanation other than this one robbery. How can someone dictate that they want 50 million? But I've got to give them full credit, because with inflation, Dave, that's probably near $1 billion these days. I thought it was very, very clever and believable as a sum, because sometimes when you get these films and they say, oh, we want $1 million or we want 2 million, you're thinking, well, why bother? You know, but they've really gone for it in this. And I thought, I just stood out as a daft little thing.
Now that's interesting that you think it's believable, because it's a high amount, and like you say, 50 million in the late 70s amounts to quite a lot today, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They say they're controlling the minds of 10 New Yorkers, so it's like 5 million a pop, isn't it?
Yeah,
and that, I don't know. Not to be callous, and you know, you don't want to negotiate with terrorists and everything, but that seems quite expensive.
A very good way to break it down, Dave. I mean, would you not just take the hit on the 10 and say, oh, go on then?
Well, I think that's why they have the line, isn't it? Oh, yeah, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Oh, they've got someone famous. They've kidnapped like Jennifer Aniston or something. All right, we'll negotiate now. But yeah, it just 10 people. It just didn't seem like that much to me. I'm not. You can't put a price on a life, can you? But I don't know. It just. I don't know. For whatever reason, it just jumped out at me. It's like, would people pay? You know, so let's say it is $1 billion in today's money. Would people pay that?
Also, Dave,
we may have to edit this bit out.
No, but also,
Dave endorses murder.
Genocide. Yeah.
Costs too much. We'll willingly let baby kittens drown and stuff. So
no, I think it's a very good point, and I think as well, Dave, if you think of it logically with the script and how it goes later on, when they're robbing the banks, like, it's only 20k that they're robbing. So there's some discrepancy. Was they're robbing banks for 20k, so they want them to be given 50 million. So everyone who's under control, mind control, is in a coma anyway. So once he's done these 10 people, I know it's like, we'll find out later on why, but at that point I was thinking, the maths doesn't really add up. And I'm not a mathematician by any stretch of the imagination. I'm thinking, well, doesn't really, 20 grand of 5 million. And if they robbed a few banks, they're still only going to get about 100 grand, aren't they? Yeah. If each person robs a bank and they were teamed up, so you say 100 grand, really, or even 200 grand if they did want it, it didn't make any logical explanation. And there wasn't really a clear indication of why this money being handed over would actually benefit the New York play. It's like they were going to say, we're going to drop a nuclear bomb, or we're going to, they're going to do something like you would think, like a Superman type situation where you've got to save it, or a Batman, something like that. It just didn't. It made no sense to me.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Is we're mind controlling 10 New Yorkers. So what? I've met New Yorkers. I'm not sure they'd even care.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I think it's just a really good, silly point with the film. And again, it's more just to serve the plot of Spider-Man, in it, just being introduced and giving him something to do, I think, because they didn't have the budget to introduce a true comic bad guy, did they? So
yeah, this was obviously all made up. And like I say, you could, apart from Spider-Man, this could be some kind of Twilight Zone episode or something like that, couldn't it?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And then, obviously, Jameson decides to run. He believes this story because he's very sceptical, isn't he, that it's just a hoax. And he decides to go with it then because his assistant says to him, if you don't go with this and we go the back page, that's it. So Peter then goes off. There's no explanation where he's going. And the next scene, he's actually in a laboratory with a guy, his friend, who we actually realise has got a Captain America T-shirt on, so another little Easter egg there. So they were planting Easter eggs back then, Dave, as well.
Yeah, it was an interesting callback. I thought this was the days before the old Easter eggs, but clearly not.
No, and as well as this, when Peter moves from one lab to another, he actually goes, and I'll hold my hands up here, I didn't spot this one bit. One, because it might have been the Vaseline on this terrible copy that we saw because it wasn't HD, but he was supposed to have gone into Dr. Banner's lab. And obviously a year later, we did get the Hulk series, didn't we? So I didn't see that, Dave. I don't know whether you picked up on that at all.
That's interesting. I didn't. And so that's the whole expanded universe even then.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? It really is interesting. And it was supposed to lead on to a crossover film, which I don't think really ever happened. So, yeah, that was one of the things with this, they said. But I've got to say, Dave, so they're in the lab. Let's set the scene for everyone if you've not seen it. They're in the lab, him and his pal. They're both talking. Peter's talking about he's got this project he's doing at home and he's waiting on these transistors, is he, or converters or something?
Power converters from Toshi, I think.
Yeah, Toshi, yeah. These are not the droids you're looking for. Yeah, he's waiting for them. And this bloke comes in. There's one of the worst bits of dialogue ever. He walks in and he's like dead apprehensive, like, is everything all right? And then his mate says, well, as long as you've had children, you'll be fine. And he's like, it was like a terrible line, as if to say, because they're in the radioactive room, aren't they? And he just says to him, like, I've got your converters or transistors, whatever they are. That'll be $47 something. I'm thinking, wow, that's a hell of a postage stamp that's gone on there. And Peter hasn't got the money to pay it. So there's a bit of terrible dialogue. His mate then gets on the machine like he's going to zap, because he've alluded to they can zap people. He said, what happens if it zaps me? And the guy runs off scared. And then I've got to say, Dave, it was almost like Russian roulette working in that laboratory, because him and Peter are on this machine, which is shaky at the best of times with like a test tube, a test cylinder, like you would have had at school in science, with these claw hands on it. It's making a terrible noise, but it's shaking like it's got the shakes or something. I'm thinking, well, that's going to fall at any point at this situation. And then obviously a spider somehow...
Health and safety gone mad. It is and safety gone mad.
It's true.
These are the days when health and safety didn't exist, aren't they?
Yeah.
These are why you have all these superheroes being created with these radioactive accidents.
Because he says to them, they've got these badges on them, they're going, as long as that badge doesn't turn, we're going to be fine. Don't spill anything. I was like, oh, come on. It was terrible. And the spider actually goes into this, obviously, sealed container.
I think the Spider was one of the best actors in the whole lot, to be honest. I mean, the way it hung there, just perfectly for the camera, and you've got old Nick Hammond in the background there. I thought, how did they get it to do that? How did they get it to hang there? Because now it'd just be a CGI spider, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It looked like it was a real spider. So I thought, fair play. I don't know how they did that.
No, and this spider gets, Peter does say to his mate, what was that then? I've just seen something then, I've seen a spark, and obviously the spider's now been radioactive, and he goes off his mate, and Peter's working in the lab away, and this spider's done some travelling, Dave, because not only has it got out of this sealed container, it's now travelled across the laboratory and decides to bite Peter, which bit of a stretch, Dave, I'll be honest with you.
Well, it is radioactive. Yeah. No, I mean it's just for that original origin of Spider-Man. He has to get bit by the radioactive spider, but yeah, it did travel some way, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, and obviously, like you say, you're right. As much as I'm sort of joking here, he does get bit, and he comes out of the lab, which can only be described. Now, obviously, we've set the scene earlier that these people who've been mind controlled, they're in cars where they have these sort of crash test dummy 5-mile-an-hour accidents, and then they knock themselves out and the baddies come and take the money out of what they've just robbed. Now, Peter comes out of his laboratory. He's got his camera on him, coincidentally. He doesn't have any bag with him or anything. And this vehicle turns towards him like it's going to park, but then turns again, chases him, follows him. Now, these people are not under any, they're under control by this guy, but it decides to chase Peter. Now, he is definitely in the wrong place at the wrong time. He could have rolled under the truck, but no, he goes down an alleyway. And we then get to see, Dave, which can only be described as the worst Spider-Man walking up a wall thing I have ever seen. And that was actually real effects. They actually hoisted him up on a crane, and it's just woeful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty awful. I mean, even the car turning into the alleyway at like
close, wasn't it?
1 mile an hour.
Yeah,
it's very weird.
Because it's a big American car. It nearly hit the wall. I'm watching it thinking it's going to crack the wall in a minute. It was so tight down that alleyway.
It was bad, but yeah, jumping up on the wall and walking around it. It's just not special effects. Again, was this the same year as Star Wars?
77, yeah.
So it's not quite up to Star Wars standards, is it? But no, it's very, very dated.
Very, and then we get to the point where the car's crashed. Them guys turn up, take the money off him. Next minute, we get introduced to the police. The police ambulances are there, rescuing him. And Peter's actually allowed within a crime scene to take pictures of the car, the person. No one's saying a word. The cops are sort of centred round him, but nothing's saying. And then we get introduced to the chomping copper, Dave. Now, I think it's only right, Dave, that you do an impression of this man, because you've got it to a T.
Well, I'm not sure I can quite do it justice. What does he say at this point? He's just, like you say, he's got his cigar. I mean, smoking everywhere throughout. It doesn't matter, inside, outside, whatever. But he's like, Parker, what are you doing here? It's all very convenient, isn't it? It's like, what the hell? But, I think he was kind of a J. Jonah Jameson surrogate, wasn't he? Because in this movie, you've got the cuddly, bewitched actor there as J. Jonah Jameson. And he seems quite laid back. If you think about the Raimi Spider-Man later, he's really laying into Parker and Spider-Man. And in this one, he isn't, but it's the policeman who's dishing out the abuse to Peter constantly.
Oh, it's terrible. And he's like that to me. He's saying, did you see him? He's like, no. And then obviously Peter can't say, I've run up the wall. So he's like, what are you doing? I turned away. I'll do his voice now, Dave, so my impression's even worse. But I turned away, and he's like, right. And then as he walks off, he goes, so where's the money? Right, get this man's name, get his address. And I'm like, mate, go home and study. And I'm like, oh, what is going on? And he was like the cliche copper. I mean, the cigar never had any smoke in or anything. It's just there in his mouth. And he's like a Hannibal Smith 2-inch stub. And he's just got it there throughout this whole film. And he's a classic, Dave. And he's like something from, I don't know, have you ever watched The Streets of San Francisco? I think it's Carl Malden.
No.
Well, put it this way, Dave. He's got a nose bigger than me, this guy. He's got one of them bulbous noses. But Michael Douglas was in it. Bit like that. But it's just a cross between all sorts of... Well, even, as I mentioned, Hannibal Smith, Banachek as well, which George Peppard played as well, a copper. And it's all them cliched coppers, really. I was also expecting Frank Drebin to turn up from Police Squad.
It was very Police Squad and Naked Gun, wasn't it?
Oh, it's fantastic. And this is what I said earlier on when I did my movie background, Dave. We get, for me, the second best scene in the whole film. My favourite is a bit later on, but my second best scene. Peter's back at his house. Aunt May's got a lovely house. It's not the Aunt May house we're used to in the previous...
Has Aunt May got a bit of a drug dealing business on the side or something? Because that house
is huge.
Is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's not in Queens or Harlem or whatever.
No.
It's going to be in New York. That's proper. Little House on the Prairie, the Waltons type. It's a massive house. It's
in the middle of New York. How much does that cost?
Exactly. and he's in his bedroom as obviously this 28-year-old supposedly playing 20-year-old kid. And from nowhere, obviously we've alluded to the fact that he's gone up buildings a couple of times and all this, but from nowhere, he opens the window to the house and stands there. And you can actually see there's a point where he realises that his feet are stuck to the ground and his hands are off the building. And he leans back, but you can see he's got a hoist on. Whoever the stuntman is, hold onto the actual building. You know, and he's pretending to sort of free walk and he's put his hands in the air backwards. And then we get what can only be described as absolute amazing effects. He's walking up, down, left, right in the middle of the day, sunny. Obviously, Aunt May lives in the middle of a field. It's no one's even seen this guy just walking up and down a building. Yeah. And I've got to say, Dave, I've researched this straight away because there's a point where he goes side on and it looks like he's walking across the roof, the top of the roof, and then disappears. And I kept thinking, that is terrible effects. You know, they've like put him walking on top of what they used to do is years ago, they put two superimposed another film reel on top, wouldn't they? So it give that effect. This was not that, Dave. This was not that. This was not Star Wars. This was not Obi-Wan getting taken down. This was a massive replica poster stroke banner lay on a floor with a camera above him and him just crawling up and down this supposed house because you can actually see he doesn't grab onto anything. And all it is almost a 3D picture of the house, and everywhere he's crawling, he's just a guy on the floor on his...
That is brilliant. I mean, talk about working within the budget and the technology of the day. Because I saw that and there's something that just looked off about it. And I was thinking, you know, I don't know when green screen or blue screen first came in, because in Star Wars they used it, didn't they?
Yeah.
But I'd have thought that was a bit more costly to do that kind of thing. And so you're looking at more movies. But I was assuming that this bit must have been a green screen or something.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I mean, when I read it, I was like, that explains why it looked so off. It looked really off. And now you could always tell in those days, when you watch them, the special effects, the studio background, didn't you? We used to say driving a car and they'd have the old Dukes of Hazzard and it looked like they were, you know, like the A-Team, Knight Rider, and they weren't driving. They were in a studio, weren't they, with a film reel, a green screen, like you say. This was none of them. I've never even heard of this technique, to be honest. I thought it was brilliant. It sounds stupid, but it's quite innovative as well, Dave, and very clever to think outside the box, I think. I think you've got to give him credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, I'm working within the budget. What a great idea.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And then, Dave, we get introduced to the spider suit with no explanation of how we got there. What did you think?
Well, I mean, I mentioned before, there's a lot missing, I think, from the characterization, from the story. You know, why is Spider-Man a hero? Because actually, when he gets his powers, he isn't heroic. He's just out for himself. And then it's only through the events of his origin. I'm not really spoiling anything. I'm sure people listening have either read or watched some of the other Spider-Man movies. So it's when he passes up the chance to, you know, apprehend the robber who ends up going on to kill his Uncle Ben. And he realizes that, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. And you know, he has all of this power and he has to do good with it. So that's his motivation. Whereas for this, it's just like, I'm walking around. I don't really want to be recognized. And you can see the shot of him looking at himself in the mirror, and he just walks off camera and then walks back again in the suit. No explanation, no nothing at all. And again, if I think of something like Iron Man, and it's unfair to compare like for like, because this was in the late 70s. It was also a TV movie. But, the reason he's kind of gold and red, there was a little bit of dialogue there to explain that, wasn't it? Because it started off all gold and, Jarvis says something about, appears a little ostentatious or something like that. And he says, yeah, you're right. Let's stick a little Ferrari red in there. So there's some kind of thought. And in the other Spider-Man movies, you see him kind of building up the suit. The Tobey Maguire, he has a really awful suit to start off with, doesn't he? And then he makes a better one later. But this, now he just disappears off camera, and then he's back. Hey, presto, here's my suit. And, I can't, for all of the budget constraints and whatever, what I don't understand is how you can get the Spider-Man eyes so wrong.
Yeah. It's like they've got a colander from a kitchen, or one of them white, like the mesh colanders you have when you're trying to siphon off veg and take the moisture out of something. It looks like that. I mean, there's no way that guy who's in the suit, who was obviously not Nick Hammond, could actually see Dave, because that was an awful... They actually looked like an insect's eyes. I don't know if that's who they were going for, but it looked terrible.
Yeah, it's the fact that they're beady, they're little and round, that I just can't get on with at all. And like I say, it's a design thing. It's not a budget constraint.
No.
So...
Very
but
strange.
anyway, yeah, so no explanation. Turns up with his suit. Then he goes off to test it out, and he can climb up the side of buildings and whatever. And you get to see the various camera angles. And again, if they've got a stuntman doing all of this stuff, he's clearly not the most limber. He looks like me, sort of. If I was trying to crawl along the floor, he's got stiff back and whatever. He just it doesn't look good, does it?
No, it doesn't. And it's not. Now, obviously, we were properly introduced to free running in Casino Royale, James Bond, in 2006. That blew everyone's mind, didn't it? And this is not this, Dave. This is exactly that. This is just some guy who was probably fit at the time with no gymnastics or athletic real ability, just having a go, basically. Like you say, like me and you, strap yours up, get a harness on, have a go. And that's exactly what it looks like. It looks really uncomfortable. It looks like after the first day of shooting, he was probably in bed for 2 days because his hamstrings and
his back's gone.
Yeah, my back's gone. And that, it looked really unnatural. But again, the suit and the way the movement was just so off. There was just no physical or genetic way that would be the case. And I just found it I was transfixed by it because it was so bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And if you're listening and you watch it, I'm sure it makes sense to you. But it just doesn't stand up at all, does it? But what I would say, there's like the first person view where you can just see the hand, in the corner of the screen, and the hand's going up. That has been used over and over again, in games and also, in the movies as well. And I thought, that's where it all comes from.
I thought it's brilliant, Dave. I'll hold my hands up with this. I actually, as a gamer, I play games all the time. First-person shooters dominate most of the time now. Call of Duty was the biggest selling first-person game of all time. We've got all sorts of stuff out at the moment that's very similar. Everything is the same. And I think for its time and what it did was so clever. And it was a budget thing more than anything. It was a budget choice, but I'd not seen that in anything before that, as far as I can remember, Dave. And I thought the way they improvised on it was actually really, really clever.
Yeah, and you think like today, you just stick on a Spider-Man suit, stick a GoPro on, and then that's how you'll get that first person view. And because, like I say, when it was in the first person view, it did look like he was going up the side of a building.
Yeah.
Whereas other bits, he's very clearly on a hoist or something, and he's just throwing his arms and legs at the wall. He's clearly got no traction or anything. They're just lifting him up.
Yeah.
But yeah, when it was that first person stuff, because I don't know. I mean, cameras back then were huge, weren't they? So where was his head at that point? I don't know, but it was really good.
I couldn't work out whether the camera... For me, the only way they could have done it was either the cameraman had him, or then again, his hands, or the guy who's Spider-Man or whoever's the stuntman actually had his hands around the cameraman as they filmed it, and they just filmed his hands. I kept thinking that's the only logical explanation for that. But again, so inventive, Dave. Yeah,
and like I say, clearly been used over and over again as an idea. So no, that was of the kind of Spider-Man, well, of anything when Spider-Man's on screen, quite frankly. I think that is the best bit, but it's like a night and day thing, because the rest of it is pretty awful.
Oh God, yeah, God.
But yeah, so he's tested his powers out in his suit, and then himself and the young girl, they sort of get together, don't they? So he meets this girl through, she's one of the hypnotized doctors or something, who was in that car crash when Peter initially jumped up the wall. And they go to visit this kind of self-help group where you've got this this abusive guru, so you've got all these, looks like middle-class, sort of wealthy people, and this guru, like I say, I found him quite abusive, because you get this woman, she stands up and says, "I'd like to buy a house in the country for my children." He says something like, "That's a terrible idea. It's all in your head." And it's just... just a very weird way that, if you've got all these highly educated middle class people, weird way for them to spend their afternoon, I guess. Yeah, it's really bizarre the way it is, and I was quite surprised that in 1977 they had that, because it's come full circle 40 years later, because there's plenty of self-help people, a la Tony Robbins and people like that, Dave. So yeah, I found it really interesting and really bizarre as well. And it seemed quite ahead of its time, because in the UK, we'd never had anything like that. And obviously, I know America used to say we're always the first ones to get things. But again, it's not very believable. And obviously, they get asked to leave by him. And we end up with, there's not really an explanation, is there? But we just know that the guru doesn't like him and he's going to go after him, sort of thing. It's supposed to set up that sort of rivalry. But the fact that he just gives up on him straight away and sends him on the merry way, I found that a bit too neat, really, and too convenient. Yeah, so obviously he's going to do something with his existing crowd, isn't he? So quite sinister there. And I think it was this bit where they go to visit the young girl's father in prison, and the guru sort of sets off his little pin on his lapel, so he goes to jump out the window, doesn't he? But he takes his time, doesn't he? So as soon as the little lapel, it gives us that sci-fi sound effect, that kind of wow, and then he's being mind controlled. So he gets up, he gets to the window. Now this is several stories up. Peter and this girl are on the ground floor, but he's got time to sort of change into his Spider-Man suit, get up there, while, again, he's being mind controlled, isn't he? He's just walked to the ledge. Why not just jump off there? So he's just sat there waiting for someone to come and rescue him, clearly. So then we get Spider-Man. He does save the day. He saves this guy's life. But I just thought, again, just in terms of, as you say, believability, I was just thinking, that's ridiculous. But anyway, kind of after that little silly bit, it ramps up another notch, doesn't it? Because he goes off to the guru's place there, and do you want to take it from here, where he encounters these three warriors? Let me put it that way.
Yes, because Dave, I wanted to take this one off, because this is my favourite part of the whole film. And I actually left you a abusive message, shall we say, not aimed at you, but there was a lot of expletives in there about how this was quite literally the worst and best fight scene I have ever seen in my life. I have got to say, talk about taking names. It is truly sensational. So Peter goes to this building, but he's trying to find out what's going on with this brainwashing stuff, isn't he? So he's sort of walking through his Spider-Man and he's there. And as always, I've mentioned this before in other episodes, the classic, if you know martial arts, you had to have been from Asia at some point. So this guy comes out with a kendo stick, an Asian guy, squares up to Peter. Peter goes into the weirdest fight stance I've ever seen, almost like a hunchback. Maybe it's because he's been on his hands and knees with this weird walking he's been doing. And then another guy comes out, makes a weird noise, like a sort of oh, and then he's like, oh, it's going off here. It's going off. Then we get another guy turns up, and we've got three of them on a bit of a Russian standoff. And Peter backs off, and there's a bit of preening. Are they going to go? Are they going to go? And it actually transpires into the single best fight scene. And when I say best, I mean worst fight scene I've ever seen ever. Absolutely fantastic. I had to rewind it because there's just all sorts of things going on in this scene that make no sense. Spider-Man is throwing bombs in these weird karate kicks, which look like it's someone who's never done karate, and he's like pretending to act up when I've said it in previous again about fighting with kids and that. And he beats a couple of them up with a few of these dodgy sort of chops and punches and these kicks. But then one of the bad guys hits Spider-Man on his sort of shin stroke ankle. And Spider-Man starts hopping round like, oh, and I'm like, oh, come on, he hardly touched him there. But then, Dave, what transpires, and if anybody, please, if you're going to watch this, if you don't want to watch the whole film, try and find this scene. It's got to be at least about an hour and 10 into the film. We're sort of getting into the last section of the film. It's an hour and a half film. He knocks one of the bad guys down, uses the bad guy's back, and sort of, he looked like he's going to do a leapfrog, but he doesn't. He then does a double donkey kick on these two guys. But when I say donkey kick, I mean he's literally a foot off the ground, and these two guys go down like they've been hit by a train or a car. Oh, it's just sensational, Dave. I mean, what did you think about all this? I mean, I'm not selling every single move there, but just the ones that stood out were brilliant.
So I think the things, and I agree, this is brilliantly awful. The thing I noticed as you described there, you said the different guys. So these three Asians who just are really good with karate, obviously being from Asia. That's the 70s view of the world, isn't it? But it's the way. So Spider-Man climbs through the window, and they all turn up from. Have they been playing hide and seek or something? And if so, how long have they been there? Because he climbs through the window, he's encountered by the first one, and then the second one comes from behind the window curtain. So he's already been hiding. Go back and watch it. He's already hiding behind the curtain as he comes through the window. And then he encounters the first one, and then he pops up from behind it. It's like, hello, have you been there for days, or what? What's the score there? So
I didn't see that.
You have to go back and watch it.
Worse.
But it's not, like you say, I mean, the stuntman, it must have been just the guy on set who had insurance or something, because, this is not, we take the mickey out of Iron Fist, don't we?
Yeah.
But this is another level of terrible fight choreography.
Oh,
I'm not even sure if there was any choreography.
No.
If they just went, play fight, guys.
Yeah, let's have a go. See what you come up with. Because, and we mentioned Scott Adkins at the top of the show. He would be literally ashamed of watching that and Michael J. White. If they watched it, they'd be so embarrassed, because there was not even the guys with the kendo sticks. You're going off the pretense of the 70s of any Asian guy knew karate, which is absolutely so wrong on so many levels. They didn't know how to fight. There was no moves from them that indicated they knew any martial arts other than pretending to hit him with a stick. And so the Spider-Man stuntman was just atrocious, but it was brilliant. I mean, one of the scenes that happens then is he gets cornered, and it is actually filmed where he goes across the ceiling to get away from him because they're all going to beat him up. He's sort of backed into a corner. And they do actually use a hoist with a rail going down the middle of the middle.
You can see it, though, can't you?
Yeah, you can see it.
He's pivoting on it.
Yeah. And that's what they all say. They actually can see when they like use the pulleys to pull him across the ceiling. There's no getting away from the fact that the budget did not stretch to that. So he did. He just got pulled along, and you can actually see it, Dave. It's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. It made the film for me.
Yeah. You say about the kendo sticks, but they're kendo sticks doubling as flamethrowers.
Yeah.
So, Spider-Man, he fires his web shooters and tries to escape, doesn't he? And then again, these kendo sticks are suddenly flamethrowers, so they burn this thing down. He ends up falling down. I mentioned about there's a lot missing from the Spider-Man character and from Peter Parker on this film for me. And one of the things, and again, I call back to the Marvel movies and Tom Holland, he's constantly giving out the wisecracks and pop culture references while he's in the middle of a fight, isn't he?
Yeah.
Here, Spider-Man doesn't say anything at all. Literally says nothing. And then, he ends up on the floor, he's running along, and as he's running along, I can't help but think back to the old Kenny Everett sketches. if you ever remember those, where he's dressed up as Spider-Man, and then he needs to go to the toilet, but he realizes the suit's got no zipper or anything. So when he's running along, I just remembered back to Kenny Everett there. But anyway, and he wants to get in a yellow cab, and the cabbie's like, what's the score here like? And he doesn't say anything. Literally says nothing for a bit, and he says nothing for a bit longer, and I'm thinking to myself, this is getting uncomfortable. And then eventually he says, I've just come from a party or something like that. I'm like, oh, thank Christ for that. He said something,
Yeah.
Because you'd start to think he was a bit sinister or something. But anyway, the cabbie sort of drives off in the end, doesn't he?
Yeah, he leads him to it. And it's mind-blowing that this even got to be made into a film. It's fun. I'd love to know what other rubbish is out there, Dave. Are you watching this? And this is something that ended up being released, like you say, on different continents, like Germany and that, and how, I do not know how people bought all this back then in 1980. I do not know, but fantastic. But yeah, Peter then gets brainwashed by the guru, and he gets brainwashed, and basically he's commanding him what to do, and Peter's getting a few flashbacks, and he ends up on the top of the Statue of Liberty. Now, the pin that's on his lapel, there's no magnet on it, there's no battery on it, there's no understanding of how this sort of little badge controls them, is there? It's not like it's got some sort of microchip in it, because around that time there probably wasn't really microchips. There's no explanation, but the guru's talking to him, he's controlling Guru's big master plans come into place. And Peter ends up knocking the pin off, which he's not fastened on very well, Dave, I've got to say, by one of the iron railings of the Empire State Building as he looks out over the New York through these sort of viewing things, which yourself and myself, we've both been up at the top of that building, so we know what it's like. And next minute, he makes a gazelle-like run from the Empire State Building, and then he's in the full suit after the guru at his base, at the dock sort of thing. And she as well, the girl has been brainwashed, as well. Mm-hmm. And she is just about to jump in front of the underground in the actual subway. And at the last second, Peter sort of saves her, and she's literally about to jump as the train comes. But there wasn't really much suspense there. It wasn't like I actually believed that she was going to jump in front of the subway, Dave, I've got to say. Yeah, it was this is, obviously, we're coming towards the end of it, but I just thought it was brilliant. That the guru, I can't even explain, I don't know, Dave, but I can't explain, but for some reason, the guru ends up reversing himself into controlling himself, and he's ended up in a bit of a trance, doesn't he? As Spider-Man enters the sort of the baddie layer as such.
Yeah, and I've got to admit, Chris, it took me a few goes to get through this. So, and I think I must have switched off, but somehow the machine, he's transfixed by his own machine, and I was thinking to myself, how did that happen? I must have missed that bit, but I was so happy at nearly being at the end. I didn't have the will to actually go back and sort of figure out what exactly happened there, but yeah, Peter sort of says to him that, I suggest you go and give yourself up to the police and what have you, and so it all gets wrapped up in a nice little bow there. So he goes off and gives himself up, and the copper and J. Jonah Jameson, they end up having a discussion there, and at this point the copper, who's been pretty grouchy through the whole film, giving Peter a hard time and very suspicious of Spider-Man, he seems to be warming to Spider-Man a little bit at this point. And Jameson's like, no, it was all you guys. You did all the hard work. I thought it was quite funny that the cop at this point is like, well, if that's the way you want to write it up. It's like, he's basically said, I'm going to lie about how I'm going to write this up. And the cop is like, yep, that's fine. I'll take all the credit, even though it was Spider-Man.
Oh, so, Dave, I've got to say, though, as you mentioned before... Sorry, David, I cut you off then.
No, that's fine. I was done.
All right, yeah, what I was going to say is, you mentioned before, and you are correct, there's no sort of breaking the fourth wall, there's no in-jokes, there's nothing about this film. And probably at that time, 40 years ago, it was something that was totally unheard of. We'd never really seen anything like that with someone really talking to the camera. But I've got to say, and I wholeheartedly think it's fantastic, is he starts pulling out these pictures just before Peter goes off into the sunset with the girl to the copper. And he's like with the kendo attacking guys, he's like with them. And actually smiling and have his arms around him as Spider-Man. They're all laughing and joking. Now, he's actually gone back there after they've not been brainwashed and had pictures took. It made no sense because when he fought them, they were out of it, weren't they? He jumped off a building and they weren't unbrainwashed till later on. So he's actually gone back and got someone to take pictures of him. And I was like, why? And what? As you can tell, I'm absolutely flummoxed with that. It just made no sense. I don't know what they...
Do you think that's how they got the idea for Aquaman when they did it in the bar and they got all the pictures with Jason Momoa and that? They got the idea from here.
My God, they did it better in Aquaman, though, Dave.
Well, I was thinking, you're trying to sell these pictures to the paper. Why not get some action shots? Some fight shots or something. No, just these big cheesy grins.
It's just terrible, wasn't it? And obviously, Peter goes off, and we're at the end of the film. Sensational.
And like I say, I can hear it in my head now. That theme tune, that da 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 da. Yeah. But also, there's lots of different music pieces throughout it, and I did notice there was one. And it sounded like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Yeah. It was like, do, 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 do. Yeah. And I was like, they can't just steal that. And I was trying to think. In fact, let me check now. When was Close Encounters? When did that come out?
I would have thought early 70s, was it?
Is it early 70s?
I'll have a look. There was three of them, weren't there?
77? It was the same year.
The Third Kind was, yeah. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, yeah.
That can't be a coincidence, surely.
No, that's absolute rip-off, Dave. Yeah. It's true, that, yeah, 1977. Unbelievable, that. Unbelievable. Steal anything, don't they?
Well, no, the movie, they wouldn't have been able to do the music if they both came out in 77, even if Close Encounters came out early 77. I mean, the amount of time it takes to get the music pieces together.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
It's a bizarre coincidence, so whether it's similar composers or whatever, I'm not really sure, but I know, the all that 70s music. You know, it does remind me of a slightly different genre that we probably won't discuss too much detail in this podcast. But I did see that the director, this is just on IMDb, the director for this was a guy called E.W. Swackhammer. And you know, so he didn't do any of the TV stuff. So which makes me wonder, you know, what did old Swackhammer go on to do? And with some of I think he might have taken some of these music pieces with him.
And Dave, we might have watched them, but anyway.
Oh dear me! But anyway, so yep, should we go into our final review?
Let's go. So, Dave, we had Heather and Ness on last week. I can't remember. Oh, it was actually me went before you, didn't I, last week?
That's right. Okay, so as we knew this was going to be our review, I wasn't sure going into it whether I'd actually seen it in the past or not. And as soon as the title credits come up, I'm thinking, oh, I remember this. And oh my God, it's as bad as I remember. Because some of the other things we've reviewed, you remember them with slightly rose-tinted glasses. But even as a kid watching this one, I remember how bad it was, and just none of the effects. One of the things, you know, was the way just the webs looked. You got these Halloween type candy floss webs that are being thrown, and sometimes just this piece of string, which it looks very awkward for, you know, Peter Parker to actually swing on. You know, he looks very uncomfortable, the actor, at that point. But I don't think we can mark it down too much because it's a late 70s movie. We haven't reviewed anything quite this old. We'd reviewed Superman, but there was a huge budget in comparison to this, which is a TV movie. So I must admit, it took me about, I would say, 5 or 6 goes to actually get through this. And I really, really struggled. And as much as I loved the music, I think the music is one of the highlights. I think the other highlight is that first-person view. So when Spider-Man's climbing up the wall, it does look realistic. And that's been taken in various movies and games since, and really, really quite innovative and quite impressive. But I just can't get over the fact that it does feel like a 70s cop show with Spider-Man shoved in it, and not a very good one at that. So not a lot of great acting on show. There's a bit where the guru, he's walking off, and he's clearly trying to walk off in a menacing way, but he does it in such an unnatural, unbelievable way. It just looks like pure comedy. So again, I think if you're out there, you haven't watched this and you're a bit intrigued, you know, you like the Spider-Man character, you like a bit of a laugh, what I would suggest is get yourself a few beers or whatever your typical choice is, maybe a few Prosecco's. Have those with a few friends, you know, just have it in the background watching there and just have a few laughs while you're watching it. So given that I've said that it is kind of, it's watchable from the respect of saying, well, this is so bad, I'm not sure. It hurts my eyes. But I do think if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. So given that, I can't really send it to the Phantom Zone. Although, you know, for 70% of the movie, I think that's where I'm thinking it's going. But for those little highlights, and a lot of the highlights are also the lowlights, like we said with the fight scene, I'm going to send it to Hell's Kitchen.
Good stuff.
Now, Chris, what about you? I'm genuinely waiting with bated breath for this one. Well,
I've got to say, you've not heard me say this is quite simply the worst thing I've ever seen, Dave. And it's not. I genuinely don't think it is. It's got some of the worst dialogue and storytelling because there literally isn't any story. It's almost like you said with the fighting that they just give them a script and said, see what you can come up with here, guys. Because there's no logical explanation to a lot of things that go on, but some of the stuff is so bad, it's good. And I genuinely, and I mean this, in the next couple of weeks, I am going to watch both of them sequels that there are on YouTube. I am, because I just can't believe that they would be any worse than this. And I want to see how Nick Hammond carries on, whether he gets any better. Because I don't remember the sequels, Dave. I only ever remember this one. I genuinely do. I don't remember there being any sequels. So I'd be really intrigued to watch them and just to see what I think. But yeah, the fight scene for me made the whole film. The fight scene and him climbing over a post that was a pretend house was just some of the most genius thing we've ever seen for all the wrong reasons. And I do think there's a lot of things that some of the later films have taken for Spider-Man from this, Dave. You know, I mean, I'm not sure. I always like the fact that the webs came from Spider-Man's hands. And in this, we didn't mention it, but he did actually create a mechanism, didn't he, which used his hands to fire webbing, which didn't really make any sense, really, to the story, because it wasn't like it come out of his hands. It was just purely he'd made a Spider-Man suit because he'd been bit by a spider. So he decided to create fake webbing with a machine. And
well, that's... Just to cut across you there, so that is in the comics. That's his original origin. So he does have to make them up, and obviously they do that, don't they, in the later movies? So the Amazing Spider-Man with what's his face,
Tobey Maguire.
Tobey Maguire was the first one where they actually came out of his hands. It was Andrew Garfield, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And Tom Holland. So they're back to the actual design, mechanical webs. But yeah, it was just literally, it was Tobey Maguire. That was the one where, they decided, they'll come out of his arms.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And genuinely, I just was amazed at this. I mean, they made this on about a $200 budget. It was absolutely atrocious, but fantastic. And I absolutely, and anyone who's listened to the shows, and we've done 58 previously to this, I have tore these sort of films to pieces. I'm the biggest critique of it. As like the Moth, I know, Howard the Duck, the Fantastic Four, which to be fair was on a really poor budget. When you watch the film afterwards, I had a lot of sympathy for the guys who made that, and I threw him under the bus in terms of Phantom Zone. But Dave, you'll be quite surprised by this. I'm actually sending it to the Halls of Justice. Because I just think it's absolutely brilliant rubbish, and I would probably watch it again.
Oh, really?
Yes, I would.
Wow.
It just amazed me. And even when and as I said, I watched it as a kid a few times, but I genuinely didn't remember the story, Dave, properly. And when I watched it this time, it was like watching it fresh. So...
yeah, I mean, I watched it, a couple of days ago, and I don't really remember the story. I certainly didn't remember it from watching it as a kid, but I just remembered, some of the fight scenes, and like I say, even as a kid, thinking that doesn't look good. Yeah. And, some of the points where he's firing and swinging off the side of buildings and stuff. So, yeah, I remembered bits of that, but not much memorable about the story for me. No,
it's quietly brilliant for me for all the right reasons. I was amazed by what I was watching. And yeah, it's fantastic, Dave. Fantastic. So, yeah, we'll see. And I will report back when I've watched the other two films, unless we do them as short reviews or something down the road, Dave.
Well, we could do. I mean, I quite like to do those. So go ahead and watch them, because it's going to be ages before we get to those, to be honest, because even just in terms of the TV pilot movies, you've got Wonder Woman, there's a Captain America out there, there's a Doctor Strange, so there's lots of there's the Hulk, definitely want to watch that. And tell you what's weird, I remember watching the Hulk, the TV series, the Bill Bixby Hulk, a lot more than I remember seeing this Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was just because it literally was on the TV less, but I definitely remember Hulk a lot more vividly than this. So
I remember the Hulk, yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and watch that TV movie as well.
Before we go, just a quick plug for ourselves. Myself and Dave do a Comics in Motion Light, as we like to call it, which is this weekly episode gets turned into a radio show where we play some indie classics around the review. if you want to get over there and listen to it, it's 7 till 8 p.m. on a Tuesday on indierocks.co.uk. So if you get over there, follow the Facebook or Twitter at IndieRocksUK and give the episode and some of the shows a follow, guys, as well.
Yep, and if you want to get in touch with us, you can get us on Comics in Motion P on Twitter, or if you want to email us, you can get us at comicsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com. And if you got suggestions, so we're probably going to pick up a suggestion we got via Twitter this week, so we'll look at that in the next couple of weeks, I think. Also, if you want to get, if you're interested, I know we've got a lot of new listeners out there. If you're interested in going through our back catalogue, we've had quite a lot of fun. We're on 59 episodes now, so, we've had quite a few laughs along the way.
And if you do like the episode, guys, and you're a new listener, we'd love you to drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. It just helps us grow the show and gets more people listening to what we do so we can create better and greater content for you guys.
Now, Chris, I have to say, the movie finished off with one of my favourite pieces of awful dialogue. And it's a question from J. Jonah Jameson, because, again, you think, how does no one know? Certainly with Clark Kent and Superman and Peter Parker and Spiderman, it's just all too convenient. And he says to him, "It's incredible. How come you're the only one who's able to get pictures of him?"
Simple. I believe.
The police station and tell Captain Barbera all about it.
Congratulations, Captain. Those men would have flown away if you hadn't called their bluff.
Well, I'll tell you the truth, I had a little help. That character in the clown suit, he worked out pretty good.
That freak, he ought to be locked up, running around like a one-man army. I don't know where he came from, but I sure hope he goes back there.
Maybe you're right. People shouldn't interfere with the law. Let the police do that.
Exactly. You men deserve all the credit for this job.
Well, if that's the way you're going to put it in your paper, how can I stop you?
It's incredible. How come you're the only one who's able to get pictures of him?
Simple. I believe.
What the f*** is that? Just...
whose voice the camera. Paul Daniels, not a lot.
I'm going to put myself on mute so you can have another go.
Oh, it went too far the other way, didn't it?